Okay, so we were discussing the relationship of religion to history, and why Hegel thinks that these two are topics which cannot be extricated from one another. We were discussing the first point, that Hegel's account of the divine follows a pattern similar to his account of the development of history. So those two lecture courses on the philosophy of history and the philosophy of religion are running parallel to one another. The second one we have also talked about a bit. It should be more or less clear that the specific conception of the divine, and thus a specific religion, is inextricably bound up with the nature of the people and their specific culture and stage of historical development. Right? And so we look at all the different religions of the world. They're all very different, and they all their differences, Hegel thinks, can be explained at least in part by looking at their local circumstances and where they appear in their level of historical development. And so from this, it also follows that the notion of the divine is a reflection of the people's own values, its own culture and self-conception. He sometimes talks about this in terms of objectification. We can think of this in terms of any form of human culture. Just anything at all is to think of human culture as an idea, something that starts in your mind. Right, I want to write a book, or an artist wants to make a painting, or to build a house or something like that, and then right, you go to work and you do it. You realize it in the world. You objectify the thought. Right, so the thought, the book that I had in my mind, or the painting that the artist had and that person's head, is then objectified. It moves from the mind and it becomes an object in the world itself. Right? And so Hegel also thinks that this conception of the different views of gods is also a form of objectification in this sense. Right? The way in which people think of the divine is something that is posited out there in the world and thought of as something external. And so therefore, right, the religion, as we were saying here, is necessarily bound up with historical development and has to be understood, at least in part, in terms of this historical dimension. So it doesn't make sense to just look at religion entirely independent of this historical account. This is something that has to be there. Okay, so then we get to our key question here of freedom, right? And so if Hegel's thesis is that the development of human history, all of human history, this long movement he wants to trace from nature to fully developed spirit, is one of the development of human freedom, which is connected with subjectivity. We have to figure out what's he talking about with freedom there, right? When we talk about freedom today, it can mean a lot of different things, right? It could be like not free because you are physically impeded from doing something. It can mean a number of different things. What does Hegel mean by that? And this is what we have to get at if we're going to appreciate his claim that we are somehow more free than the earlier peoples. One way to make this intuitive would be to think of our early ancestors, right? The very first human beings. If you're out there in nature and you are exposed to the elements of nature, and you're the victim of things which are entirely out of your control, of floods and plagues and things like this. And living in that world, your feeling of control of your own agency is going to be quite limited, right? You're going to feel like you're at the mercy of everything, right? Whereas nowadays, right, we live in the illusion that we're in control of everything, right? We have mastered the planet, right? There's nothing that we can't do, right? And so clearly a long series of events has had to take place until we've reached this point where we, in some ways, disregard nature entirely. We feel like we have completely mastered nature, right? That we always have a solution for it. Of course, we're living in an illusion about this. I mean, things still happen, but nonetheless, we feel like we have established with our intelligence, our technology, our knowledge, a certain stability where we can at least keep nature in check by and large. Yeah, but the other point, perhaps the more important one that Hegel's talking about, has to do with the way in which we live together in communities. This has to do with Hegel's key term of Sittlichkeit, which is not a good English translation for it. That's why I put it there in German. It's usually translated as something like ethical life. It comes from the German word Sitte, which just means it's a custom, a habit. And so the collection of human customs altogether, taken abstractly, this is the realm of customs and habits that make up human society. Right? And so think of all the different forms of human interaction which are dictated by these things. I mean, the simplest things, right? We are always, the way in which we can interact with one another, the way in which society is glued together, is the fact that we all intuitively know these rules. This is what the long period of childhood is all about, right? When you're a child, you learn that you cannot do that in society, right? You should not do that. This is the way the game works, right? And as adults, we have mastered these rules and we can participate in the game of social life. Hegel's point here is that this is also something which is changing. As we know, we experience this in our own times, right? Our own sensibilities change, right? Your sensibilities about things are different probably from the generation of your parents. And Hegel's point is when we look at this historically, we can see a very radical shift which took place probably around the time of ancient Greece, with the beginning of the Christian world. And his idea is something like this. If we look at traditional societies, the focus is very much on the group, right? The society, the family, the clan, the tribe. That the focus is not on the individual. So in other words, in traditional societies, when one is born, in a certain sense, the path is already laid out for one, right? If you are a male, right, you're going to do this profession, you'll have this kind of upbringing, you'll do military service, right? If you're a female, right, things will go in a different direction, right? In a certain sense, this is pre-programmed by the society in which you're born into. Right? Nobody asks you about that. Is this what you want to do? Right? Is this something you're interested in? Something you're inclined to do? It doesn't matter, right? In traditional societies, it doesn't matter, right? So Hegel's point is here, there's no recognition there of the value of a person as an individual. Right? Each person in those societies, in a certain sense, their individuality is disregarded, and they're thought of simply as a part of the larger unit to which they belong. Right? And this is the way he understands it. This is really the fundamental characteristic of the ancient world. What he's calling the principle of individuality, of subjectivity, or subjective freedom has not yet arisen. Match that up with our modern intuitions, right? In our modern world, right, we think, well, yeah, I'm in control here, right? I can choose to do what I want. I can choose what university I want to go to. I can choose what field of studies I want to take. I can choose whatever books I want to read. Basic decisions about my personal life I get to make, right? And we're offended when somebody else tells us what to do, right? There are certain people, maybe our friends or our family, that we got a little leeway there. We can listen to their advice. But ultimately, it's my decision, right? Think of this in terms of, you go to the doctor, or you go to a financial advisor or something like that. We recognize that they have a certain expertise in a certain area, and we need their expertise, right? And then they tell us, okay, this is my assessment of your situation. I would recommend this. Okay, I listen to that. I try to understand that as best I can, but ultimately, it's my decision, right? They're not going to force me to do anything. They can't force me to do anything, but I can take their advice. I can disregard their advice. I can take a part of their advice. I can ask them for different advice, right? So Hegel's point, this is our modern principle. This is subjective freedom. This is what it's all about. Each and every one of us, we believe in the value of the individual, right? That there's something fundamentally irreducible, right? Each of us counts for something. Each of us is something special, something unique, and each of us has a certain set of inalienable rights, right? Hegel says, well, for us, this is completely intuitive, but this wasn't the way it always was, right? Back in the distant past, these are entirely foreign concepts. People didn't think this way at all, right? People did what they were told to do, right? Nobody ever asked them what they wanted to do. This is simply, you do things because this is the way society has structured, this is the way we've always been doing, this is the way our ancestors have done them, so who are you to question them, right? That's the ancient way of thinking. Our modern way of thinking is just the opposite, right? Who are you to tell me what to do, right? So, and I think we're going very much in the other direction, right? To regard ourselves as the individuals entirely independent of others. And so the historical story that Hegel's tracing in both of these series of lectures is this development. So let's go back and look at those different cultures and see where are they at on this big scale, right? Are they at that early stage where everything is determined by custom and habit and there's no recognition of the individual? Or are they closer to our modern view, right? Where we celebrate individuality, where individuality is made really a concrete and important value for all of us, right? And so Hegel looks at this, right, and he organizes the different cultures accordingly, puts them in a line, right? Says, okay, here are the ones which are not quite, are just only beginning to realize this, and here are the ones who are developing it better, and then we get up to the modern world. So that's the story he wants to tell, and that's the conception of freedom that he has in mind when he means that we are freer than was the case in the past. And so what we want to get to is how this conception of freedom hooks up with Christianity. Well, he thinks Christianity is, of all the religions of the world, the one religion which facilitates that self-conception of individuality, the importance of the individual, and facilitates this idea that we're free to do what we want and that this is a valuable thing. And so this is basically some of the key points of where we want to get to, right? The development of human freedom in the world religions culminates in Christianity. We know this. Only Christianity recognizes the absolute value of the individual. Each human being is created by God in the image of God and has something divine in them. This is a part of it, but we want to hear the rest of the story. And of course, with this dialectic of recognition, we know that for one person to be free, he or she must recognize others as free. It can't be the case that, okay, I want all of you to recognize me as free, but I will hold you in a situation of servitude. That doesn't make sense, right? Also, freedom means inwardness and subjectivity, the right to decide for oneself. And so for God to be free, humans must also be free. So there's also a sense of a dialectical relationship as well there. And so what we want to get to is this broader conception of why he thinks Christianity fulfills this and what it is about, particularly this term inwardness, which is so important, which he thinks Christianity is really instrumental in giving to human history. The idea that in these older cultures, his thesis is that in these older traditional societies, they didn't believe in inwardness. They had no sense of inwardness in the way we believe in inwardness. What is inwardness? What does that mean? So in other words, the idea is when you look at another person, right, that person is simply the external physical being which you see. And you look at that person in a certain historical cultural context, right, they're playing a specific role. They're a male or a female in a specific cultural caste playing a specific role. That's it. That's the end of the story. But that inward side, what they are as with regard to their own desires and wishes and hopes and dreams, the things which we're focused on, that part is not so clearly developed. And so, again, test your modern intuitions, right? Ours is just the opposite of that. Well, what do we tell each other when we meet new people or when we look around? It's like the external, right? We're not supposed to get too hung up on that, right? People, they come from different places, they have many different looks. But what we're most interested in is the inward side. What kind of a person is that? Is this the kind of person who has similar values to me? Is somebody who I would like to have as a friend, right? And so for us, our more immediate intuition is towards an investigation of the inwardness. And this is what Hegel says is it took a long time to develop. Okay, all of this just by way of background, setting the stage. And now what we have to do is say, all right, Hegel, that sounds like a great theory. Is it true, right? How does this look if we go to the actual material of the world religions? And so here we have our quick thumbnail sketch of Hegel's account of the religions of the world to see what kind of thing he's talking about, to see if we can trace this movement that he's identified. And so one of the first religions he begins with is Hinduism. In Hinduism, worships the god Brahma. Brahma is conceived of as a sort of an all-creating force of the universe, of nature, and in this conception, basically anything in nature can be seen as an avatar, is the correct word, but an incarnation or a representation of the divine, right? And so an animal, a plant, the Ganges River, things like this are a physical sign of Brahma in the world. And so for this reason, right, in Hinduism, right, we have the idea of a sacred cow, right? The cow is somehow invested with the divinity. We have many different, really a whole array, a whole pantheon of gods who are, have this animal form, right? So we have Hanuman, the monkey god, from the Hindu epic Ramayana, right? Monkey god who actually helps the hero Rama to combat the forces of evil. And we also have Ganesh, the elephant god, right? And many more. One could go on about the different deities in Hinduism. Hegel treats this with a certain degree of criticism and even condescension. So this is just a completely out of control. It's not something like, say, the Greek pantheon where you have a clearly defined set of gods and goddesses. With ancient Hinduism, this is just crazy. This is a multitude of different divinities, simply because, well, if you believe your God is represented in nature, well, nature's pretty big. Like anything can be conceived of as containing the divine. Yeah. So, in short, Hinduism is a religion of nature, right? It reveres the natural as the divine. The next religion that he treats after this is Zoroastrianism. This is the religion of ancient Persia. The Zoroastrians worshipped light and fire, and so they had fire altars. The idea was that, light is the most fundamental thing, right, that one can have, and that the divine is physically present in fire, right? And so with these altars of fire, they're not symbolical. It's not like the fire itself is a representation of the god, and the god is actually in the fire itself. This religion also develops in a way that it's dualistic. So if you put a lot of focus on light, and then there's of course a natural pendant to that, darkness, right? And if you invest this with moral qualities, then you have the conflict of good and evil. And so this Zoroastrianism is often conceived of as a dualistic religion, which conceives of two different deities which are in struggle with one another, the struggles of light and darkness, this epic battle that's always pretty much a tie, right? It's not like the one or the other always has the upper hand. And in some ways, there's some plausibility, some intuitive plausibility to that, right? If you look at it in the world, right? Is there more evil or is there more good in the world? Well, it's a difficult evaluation. Is there more light, more darkness? Well, it depends on what kind of a day you're having, I guess. In any case, Zoroastrianism also a religion of nature, right? A natural entity, light, fire, is conceived of as the divine. Then Hegel gets to the Egyptian religion, which, if you remember on the big chart, right, so we're moving from left to right on the chart, the Egyptian religion was right about in the middle. So it's the culmination of the religions of nature, and it forms the transition to the religions of spirit. And so Hegel thinks that the Egyptian religion is superior to the earlier religions because it's started to see. It has the first faint glimmerings of the idea of the divine being a anthropocentric, self-conscious entity, whereas those earlier religions did not. And Hegel gives us some arguments for this. Why he thinks that the ancient Egyptian religion has this feature, whereas the others do not. Right? He refers specifically to this image, maybe not exactly this one or one like it in any case, in his lectures where he says, Osiris is in a special sense the lord of the realm of the dead, the judge of the dead. Countless number of pictures or representations are to be found in which Osiris is delineated as judge, while before him is a scribe who is reckoning up for him the deeds of the soul brought into his presence. All right, this is the picture. Right? So we have it's supposed to be read left to right. You have the dead soul here being led into the underworld by the god Anubis, right? The god who's has the head of a jackal. And then what's the first thing that happens once they get to the underworld? We have to figure out if this soul is worthy or not, right? And so you have a judgment, and the judgment is by the scale, right? And so you put the heart of the dead soul on the scale and you weigh it against a feather. And so if the heart is burdened with sinfulness, right, then it's going to be heavy. Right? But if it's not, if this is a good person, then it's going to weigh less than the feather, and then the person gets to pass and gets to enter into the underworld. But if it's not the case, it turns out this is not a good person, then this deity here, Amut, who is the crocodile head and the body of hippopotamus, is waiting anxiously because he can eat the heart right away of the evil person and thereby destroy the person. The conception is that the heart is where the soul is located. And so then what's happening here, we have the god Thoth, who is the head of an ibis, who's writing down the result of the judgment, right? Saying this guy passed, this guy didn't pass. And then right, we see the horse, the god, the hawk's head is then leading the dead person, introducing him to Osiris, the king of the underworld, and say, okay, here's our next dead guy who's entering into the underworld. Why is this such a big deal for Hegel? Why does he says, look at this picture, look at this image, this conception of the underworld. What does this tell us about the way the Egyptians thought of themselves as individuals? He's saying this is a huge step in human history. Why is that? Because this recognizes that there is a form of individuality, right? That what this guy did in his life, it matters, right? Indeed, it matters so much that the gods care about it, right? That they're even going to judge you for it. They're going to look at this carefully. And you will be rewarded or punished for it. In the past, this is not the case. Think of in Homer, right? In the Odyssey, right? When they go to the underworld, and Odysseus sees all his old buddies from the Trojan War, right? And asks him, how's it going? It's going terrible. I hate it here, right? They're all suffering in Hades, right? It's a miserable situation, right? But all right, that's I guess what it's supposed to look like. But you don't have this picture, right? You don't have a sense of judgment, right? Everybody there is suffering. It's all leveled off. It's the same deal in the ancient Sumerian underworld. If you read Gilgamesh, basically, so everybody, rich or poor, right, good or bad, you just go there and you're miserable, right? So your small consolation is, or you can be there, right? You don't cease to exist with death, but yet, I mean, there's no differentiation. There's no sense of individuality. Who you are as an individual, it doesn't matter. Rich or poor, good or bad, righteous, right, immoral, it doesn't matter. And Hegel's saying here, we get the first glimmering of the idea of individuality in our modern sense. right? That there's something about each person which matters. Here, even the very king of the underworld is watching over what happens to you in your judgment. Right? Kind of intimidating, right? It's going to cares that much about what I'm doing in my life. I should get it together then. Okay. What else does he note about this? It's an intriguing interpretation. When we look at all of the Egyptian gods, right, with the exception of Osiris, that they all seem to have this characteristic that they're mixed figures. Right? They're not entirely human, but they're not entirely animal either. Think of the obvious example, like the Sphinx, right? You have the lion body and the human head. But this is true of pretty much all the other Egyptian deities. And it's either one form or another, the human head, animal body, or the animal head and human body. Here we have a number of different examples of that. Sobek, who has the head of a crocodile, Knum, the head of a ram, and look at the whole set of female deities, the same story. A second is the head of a cat. Tawaret is a hippopotamus. Now, what's Hegel's interpretation of this? How on earth do people come to think of gods like this? This is really kind of bizarre, isn't it? These mixed creatures. And Hegel's thinking, well, try to put this in the big picture, right? We begin with a worship of the gods of nature. They're simply the animals themselves, which are the divinities, right? And then on the other side of this, right, we have the Greek and Roman religions, where they're entirely anthropocentric. Right? What do we have here? It's in the middle, right? It's a little bit animal, but also a little bit like human beings, right? And they're mixed together, right? And so the intuition is here, but these all started out as forms of animal worship, basically. But then over the course of time, as the Egyptians began to realize that there is something more, there's something higher than the merely animal, there is this concept of spirit, that is the human culture, human thinking. And something had to change. And they had this human element had to emerge more clearly. It had to be somehow included in their conceptions of the gods. And how did they do that? Well, they mixed them together by giving them, say, human bodies. And yeah, you can think about how this happens really more concretely if we just take a couple of examples. We have Anubis and Thoth, once again, that we saw in the earlier picture. Yeah, Anubis is these different gods are in charge of different natural areas, right? We're familiar with this from Greek mythology. So Poseidon, he's in charge of the oceans, right, for example. Or Zeus is in charge of the heavens, right? So Anubis, he's in charge of science and knowledge, right? Among other things, mummification. And so you would think, well, wait a minute, hold on, I've never seen a jackal being interested in science, or there's something funny about that, right? This is clearly something that has been imported from the human sphere, right, and has been added after the fact. A similar example with Thoth, right? He covers a number of different areas, right? He is an Ibis, but he's the god of writing. And so he's the one who invents the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and so he's always portrayed with this writing tablet. So it's a wax tablet, and he's pressing these images onto it. The same story, right? When I think of writing, I think of a person doing the writing. I don't think of an ibis or an animal doing the writing. It doesn't make any sense, right? And so Hegel's point is here that it's the same idea, that at some point there's this recognition that, wait, there's something in human culture which is higher than nature, writing. You look at all of nature, all the animal spheres, they don't have writing. If you look at all the animal spheres, they don't have science. This is something that is just human. And so this is something we want to attribute to the divine. It's a high thing, it's an important thing, right? Because we value writing, we value science. But then what do we do with it if all of our gods are just animals? This is difficult, right? So we have to change the conception of the god so that they can also be responsible for these elements of human culture. And so this means they have to become slightly more anthropomorphic. They have to look like human beings more. And so this explains, according to Hegel, why these Egyptian gods are mixed, right? They're a little bit like animals, but they're also a little bit like the humans. And he thinks we can see evidence in this, in the fact that you can also see the way in which these deities were worshipped purely in the animal form, right? So here's Anubis as a dog, or Thoth is depicted as an ibis, or sometimes as a baboon, right? So these are the purely animal forms, which are the remains of the earlier religious tradition, right? Where they were purely worshippers of nature, and then at some point when these other qualities or characteristics came along and became developed, then the morphology, the concept of their gods had to change and move in a more human direction. We then move to the Greek religion. So now we make the transition from the religions of nature to the religions of spirit. And Hegel spends a lot of time talking about the Greek religion, which he's very interested in. He's a bit of a Hellenist himself. He is very much a fan of ancient Greek culture, and so he's made a careful study of these things. And what he notices then about the Greek religion is, again, if you're just like you read Hesiod for the first time, it just looks like a complete chaos of gods and goddesses. It's difficult to make much sense out of. But Hegel says, no, there is a logic here if you can discern it. And he said the logic has to do with the different generations of the gods and the way in which through those different generations the shapes of those gods also changed. And so if you read in Hesiod, in fact, he depicts this reasonably clearly, right, that we have basically three generations. The very first gods came from this primordial chaos, and they were all gods which seem very close to nature. There's not really much personification with them. And then these were succeeded by a group of gods known as the Titans, right? And the next generation, and so the Titans, the children of Gaia, the earth goddess, and Uranus. And these are also gods who, the Titans themselves were very much associated with nature, right? So Oceanos, very clear, the god of the ocean, right? And then we have the third generation, the one that most of us are probably most familiar with, the Olympian gods, who overthrow the Titans and take charge. And here's a standard pantheon that we're familiar with, led by Zeus. And Hegel's point here is that with this movement, we can see exactly the movement he's been tracing, a movement from nature to spirit. There's a movement of gods who are simply representations of basic natural forces, the ocean, the heavens, to a conception of gods as self-conscious, as spirit. And this is what we end up here with the Olympians. And if you think, intuitively, how does this work? I mean, Hegel, great theory, but just at a psychological level, how would this work? If we imagine in our early human beings victims of the forces of nature, at the mercy of nature the whole time, very often you come into very difficult situations, right? Where you see your people in your family, in your clan, in your tribe, suffering, dying, right? Having an extremely difficult time due to some force of nature, right? If it's just a force of nature, then you're completely helpless. You can do nothing. But if that force of nature is conceived of as like you, as like a self-conscious entity, then it looks a little different. Then you can make a sacrifice, and you can pray to the god, right? Then, hey, let me give you something, and you can, restore my friend to health, or you can, take the plague away, or something like this. And so the idea of a personification of a natural force makes perfect sense. Right? This is, in a way, it's empowering, right? Imagine yourself in this situation where people are suffering terribly or dying. I mean, what's the natural human impulse? You want to do something. You don't want to just stand by and feel completely helpless, but you want to somehow be active in finding a solution to this, and not just regard yourself as a victim of the forces of nature. One way to do this is to conceive of those forces of nature as gods who are also self-conscious. So this is the movement Hegel is trying to trace, and he gives us some interesting examples of this in order to illustrate the point. The one is that it's sort of interesting. Among the Titans we have the god Oceanos, god of the ocean, and then among the Olympians we have Poseidon, the same god. Well, wait a minute, how does that work? Well, how can you have two gods who are responsible for the same sphere of activity? Right? Isn't that the whole point of the pantheon? Right? That they're in charge of different spheres, right? So they're, in a certain sense, the pantheon is covering all of nature. It doesn't make any sense if the two are covering the same sphere. Well, this is the reason why we have the myth of the war of the gods. So the Olympians are displacing the Titans, or taking over their positions, right? So Poseidon comes in, takes the place of Oceanus, and Hegel's saying, but wait, look closely now. How does Poseidon look in comparison to Oceanus and these two different generations of gods? How are these two gods depicted? Here we have Poseidon. He's riding through the waves, right? You see the fish around him, right, in his chariot. Now, what does that tell us about him, right? He's riding a chariot. This is human culture, right? Human beings can make chariots and they can train horses. You don't see this in nature, right? So he is representative of certain human abilities and skills which transcend nature. And down here we have poor old Oceanos, right? He's not riding a chariot, right? He's down in a position of complete insignificance. And look carefully at how he's portrayed, right? Here we have Poseidon. He looks like kind of like a Greek warrior. He's riding the chariot, he's got the trident. But this guy, right, he has these claws on his head. It looks like a lobster or something. And you can see the lower part of his body. He's also like a fish, which you can see in this image. Right? He's got this like eel-like thing wandering around. So what's the point here, right? Oceanus, he is nature, right? He's still conceived of as an object of nature, as like an animal, like a fish or something. Poseidon, by contrast, he is a representative of human culture, right? He knows how to train horses. He knows how to ride a chariot. This is something entirely different. Oceanus couldn't do this. That's why he had to go, right? This is represented symbolically in the idea of the war of the gods, but Hegel's saying what the war of the gods is representing is a shift that took place over millennia in Greek culture, right? They conceived of their gods, they started to conceive of their gods in a different way because their own society was changing, because they themselves learned how to build chariots and to tame horses and things like that. And then suddenly, in that world, those older gods, they don't look so powerful anymore, right? You need to add something, you need to supplement something in order to make them powerful in the same way, right? When it's the case that the human abilities begin to surpass the abilities of the gods, right? Something has got to give, right? You have to modify your conception of the gods. Now, what else do we have? He talks about Apollo and Helios, right? Helios, the god of the sun, or put differently, the sun god, right? So simply synonymous with the sun itself. And Apollo is the pendant to that in among the Olympians. And what does Hegel note about that? The Lycian Apollo has a direct connection with light, and the ideas connected with him come from Asia Minor. In the East, the natural element, light, gets greater prominence, as with Zoroastrianism. Right? But even at a later period, Apollo still has something of his natural element left, for he was represented with a nimbus around his head. So the idea is, right, you can conceive of a god of light, as in Zoroastrianism, as fire, as something like that, is a natural entity. But then when you associate light with other things, such as human wisdom or knowledge, right? The most obvious metaphor, right? You understand, you know something when you see it, right? When light is cast upon it, right? Then suddenly there is a shift that takes place. The human element comes in, and right, this is the god Apollo, right? The god of wisdom. And Hegel's saying, right here we see another case of this displacement. But we can still see that in Apollo we have this a nimbus, a halo around Apollo's head, which is still a representation of the earlier image of the fact that he's represented light. But now that's not the main thing anymore, but that's just a symbolic thing, right? The main thing is what he represents in human culture. Yeah, we can see this also very clearly, probably most clearly, in the way in which animals are represented as symbolic with the other gods, almost like as mascots, right? Here you have Zeus, who's represented always with the eagle, Athena because we philosophers know, the owl, right? And Aphrodite with the sparrow. Think of this movement we're tracing, right? We begin with, first it's the animals themselves, which are the gods, right? It is the eagle. The eagle's a god, right? And then we have the Egyptians, where it's a little bit of both, right? It's Horus, right? He's got the head of a hawk, but he's that part human being. But now here, look what's happened, right? Now it's the human which is burst forth. Now it's the human side, which is the god. And what's happened to the animal side is it disappeared. We're going to get rid of it altogether because we realize it's the human qualities which are really what's divine. No, they don't disappear. They shrink. They become symbolic, right? It's no longer that we're not venerating the sparrow, the owl. Those are just symbols of the true divinity, which is something in human form. Right, and so here we can see, we need like the nice animation graphic to show this transition, right, where at first it's like the animal, which is the big thing, which shrinks down, and the human, which is insignificant and arises. Sorry, my PowerPoint's not that smart yet. But, we can still see a vestige of this. One could argue, even in Christianity, where the symbols are used in a similar fashion with the gospel writers. Mark is often portrayed as the symbol of the lion, Luke the ox, and John the eagle. Yeah, where are we at? Hegel also talks about makes a comparison with the cult of Diana or Artemis. This is a somewhat complex story. Right, this was an earlier cult which came from Asia, which came from Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. The Diana of Ephesus. Ephesus in the ancient world had a huge temple dedicated to this goddess. Right? And Hegel, at some point, this cult was taken up by the Greeks and then changed in Greek culture. And so here, this gives Hegel a basis for comparison again, where we have the Asian religions, which are focused on nature, and the Greek religion, which has realized the human element. And so what does he say here? Like the Diana of Ephesus is still Asiatic. It is represented with many breasts and covered with images of animals. She has, in fact, as the basis of her character, natural life, the producing and nourishing power of nature. On the other hand, Diana of the Greeks is the huntress who kills animals. So, in this image we have the Diana of Ephesus. We see this. It's kind of a strange sculpture, the one that you have to look at a little bit more carefully. She's portrayed with a series of different breasts, right, representing the mother of nature, right? So that she is nurturing all of the animals. To do that, you don't need just two breasts, you need a lot of them. And here we have, she's flanked by two animals, and here we also see the images of the animals which she's protecting. Right, so you stand back, you look at it, there are some human elements there, but there's a clear attempt to associate her with nature, right? She is like the animals, right? She is the friend of the animals. Right? She is continuous with the animals. We go over here to the Greek Diana, how this same goddess is then transformed in the Greek cult. Now, we're into a different world here altogether, right? Who's the Greek Diana? She's a huntress, right? She hunts the animals. Right? It's exactly the opposite, right? This one's protecting the animals, protecting nature. This one represents the superiority of the human over nature, right? With human ingenuity, with the technology of bows and arrows, we can kill the animal. Right? We can eat the animal. Right? This is a different conception altogether, right? Where a recognition that There is some aspect of human life which transcends nature, which is higher than nature. And so for Hegel, this is what is representing the hunter's Diana. Okay, what else do we have here? Hegel talks also in his lectures a lot about, he compares architecture quite a bit. One of these is the Egyptian pyramids, which everybody knows, the Greek Parthenon. What's the point of this? He thinks this also captures the difference between these two very different conceptions of what he's calling Asiatical, non-Western, if you will, and the Greek spirit. The idea being that in the story he's tracing, it's all about the human mind recognizing itself as something free and subjective and individual. This is what the Egyptians started to realize. They didn't quite get there. The Greeks got it maybe a little bit more, and then in the modern world we get it even more. And Hegel thinks we can see this even depicted in their architecture. The idea of that is that it's the story of self-discovery, right? You come to know yourself. What does that mean? To know who you are as a human being, that you have these abilities and these faculties to exercise your freedom, to be free. These earlier cultures, according to Hegel, didn't know themselves yet. They were obscure to themselves. What it was to be truly human, they hadn't quite got there yet. And so Hegel thinks that we can see this portrayed in this dialectic of inner and outer. In other words, there has to be an inward side, right, which comes out into the world and is realized in the world, in contrast to just an inward side which is stuck there. He thinks the Egyptians are stuck there. They've started to get the first glimmering of what is human, but they haven't quite got there yet. And this is reflected in the idea of the pyramids. What are the pyramids? Well, they are tombs for the pharaohs, elaborately constructed, elaborately decorated on the inside. When they're done, the door's closed, covered forever. You're never supposed to see it again, right? They're supposed to be, they're impressive in their size, but from the outside they're supposed to be forbidden. You're never supposed to go in there. We, of course, have the luxury, we know what's inside because of modern archaeology, but that wasn't the original idea. And so the point there is that, well, you're not really supposed to know this, right? You're not, what's on the inside should stay on the inside. Compare this to the Parthenon, right? Everything is open, right? This is the place where the Greeks have their town hall meetings or whatever, where they have their assemblies, right? They have like the friezes on the Parthenon. They invite you as a spectator to come closer to look, to inspect them, right? It's freely accessible. And so his point is in the Greek world, you have a transparency, an openness, in Hegel's mind, a self-awareness, which is not there yet for the Egyptians, which is still closed off, or closed within itself, I guess you would say. Yeah, but what about the stuff about this inwardness? Right? What does he really mean by that? Let me give you a couple of examples of that he gives to show how our sensibilities are different in the way we think about human psychology. One of these comes from the first book of the Iliad, where we have the conflict among the Greek chieftains. Remember the story, King Agamemnon, he insults the great warrior Achilles by depriving him of his war prize, the beautiful slave girl that Achilles is in love with, right? Achilles, right, the great warrior, he's been out there doing all the fighting. This is a huge insult for him, right? A huge offense, and so he's also sort of the young, hot-headed guy a little bit. And so, the way in which the story is portrayed, right? He's there, and he's very angry, and he contemplates whether or not he should take out his sword and attack Agamemnon in anger. You can just read the passage as it is in the Iliad. And anger came on Peleus' son, Achilles, right? And within his shaggy breast, the heart was divided in two ways, pondering whether to draw from beside his thigh the sharp sword, driving away all those who stood between, and kill the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, or else to check the spleen within and keep down his anger. Now as he weighed in mind and spirit these two courses, and was drawing from its scabbard the great sword, Athena descended from the sky. The goddess standing behind Peleus' son caught him by the fair hair, appearing only to him, for no man of others saw her. And so here we see Athena coming in and holding him back. What's the story here, right? What does this tell us about human agency? Hegel's interpretation of this is if something like this were to happen today, right? How would you describe it? I guess we've all had situations like this where we're really worked up about something. We're just furious. We want to do something, right? And then we think the better. That's probably not such a good idea after all, right? We've seen this as a modern phenomenon as well. How do we understand this? We just say, well, you think about it for a second, you cool down, right? Your prudence wins out among the immediate emotional, angry impulse, right? So we think that it's our own mind which prudence helps us out to realize we should just calm down and not physically attack somebody. Okay. But how is it portrayed here? That's not what happens, right? It's not that Achilles has this super ego, something in his own mind that says, no, stop, not a good idea. Something comes from the outside. It's the goddess Athena that stops him, right? And so Hegel's saying, what conception of the human being is behind this? I mean, on this view, it's what we are calling prudence today, what we recognize that all of us is having, it's part of something we learn as small children. The Greeks don't recognize it, right? This is not a natural thing that human beings have, but this is something that comes from the outside. The gods, they have it, but we don't. Right? So we're all a bunch of impulsive, hot-headed people. Right? If it weren't for the gods, we'd be in a lot of trouble. Right? And so, think of that for a minute, right? When we think of human characters, well, what's in the human mind, all those different things. Prudence is one of them. Take that out of the equation. Imagine that to be something in the external world that's got to come to you maybe by luck or not. We'd all be in a lot of trouble, right? Think about how many things in human activity this helps us to steer. This is what we're talking about when we talk about inwardness, right? You can see the results of prudence, but you don't see prudence because that's something individual in your own head, right? And so that's why Hegel finds that this is something so striking that this is then represented in this way is an external deity coming down to restrain Achilles. Or if you want a more intuitive example, modern example, just think of the way in which children are raised. Right? Children are not very prudent when they start out, right? Well, as parents or teachers, educators, you always got to stop. No, you can't do that. Stop, right? This is this picture here, right? Something external has got to come in to stop it, right? Because that internal mechanism has not yet developed in the children. It's only through a long development of childhood and learning that we slowly internalize that in our own minds so that we're able to regulate it for ourselves, right? We don't need any help from the outside. We don't need our parents or our teachers to tell us, no, don't do that, right? We can do it ourselves. But the Greeks haven't got there yet, right? They're still on that level of child psychology, if you will, for Hegel. He gives another example of this, which is an interesting, Orestes and the Erinyes. And from the Oresteia, what's the story? So Orestes avenges the murder of his father by killing his mother Clytemnestra and her lover. Right? So this is the tragic dilemma he's in. Right? He's duty bound to avenge the murder of his father as the son, but yet in order to do so, he has to kill a blood relative, his own mother. Right? So he can't really win. He's going to be condemned one way or the other. So he goes through, avenges his father, and as a result of this, these deities, the Erinyes, run after him the whole time and constantly torment him. Right? They don't leave him any peace. They don't let him rest. And so he's constantly trying to run to a temple where he can keep them out or keep them away from him. And what's the point? Why is this story so interesting or so important for Hegel? What does this illustrate? Again, take a modern example, right? When we do something wrong, we don't have to kill anybody. When we do something wrong and we know it's wrong, right? We have a conscience, right? And the conscience bothers us. Why did I do that? I should apologize to that guy, right? It's something that, right? It's about what it is to be a moral being in the modern world, right? None of us is perfect. We do things that we regret, right? And the faculty of human conscience is always there for us, right? And it bothers us, and it keeps us, right? It encourages us in the future to do things that are morally correct. But yeah, an important part of our mental life. What does this story illustrate? For Hegel, the Greeks didn't have the idea of conscience yet. In other words, Orestes he himself is not eaten up by an inner conscience. What was I thinking? I killed my own mother. No. That impulse comes from the outside. If it weren't the case, fine, I killed my mother, I don't care. She deserved it, right? She murdered my father, right? No. This comes from the outside. He cannot be allowed to be nonchalant about it because of these goddesses. So this illustrates the point for Hegel, to the Greek mind. Everybody is, their anthropology, so to speak, is basically such that everybody is pretty much an immoral person that has no conscience whatsoever. It would do anything at all they think they can get away with, right, and not worry about it. If it were not for these guys, the Iranians, right? That's the only thing keeping us in check. But that's something external. Whereas our modern conception is no, we don't need that, right? Because, well, as moral entities, we have a conscience, right? And again, how do we have a conscience? Were we born with a conscience? No. We had to develop it over a long period of childhood education, right? We had to, again, it's the same sort of a story, right? Your mother or your teacher telling you shouldn't have done that. You should feel bad about doing that, right? And after all, okay, sorry, right? And after a long period of time, suddenly that voice of your mother comes into your own head, right? We all know it, right? We don't need her physically there to know she would not like me doing this, right? You have internalized it to the point that, right, you're acting in accordance with it, even though your intuitions, your impulses might want you to do something else. Nonetheless, you stop, right? Because you have a concept of prudence, you have a concept of conscience, which was a part of your upbringing. This is also the conscience. It's also a part of inwardness, right? I can't see your conscience. I can just see the way you act in the world. I can't see your conscience. I can't see. Conscience is bothering you about doing something, about saying something, right? So it's a part of the inward feature. For the Greeks, this sphere of inwardness is still undeveloped. Yeah, Hegel thinks of like one of the real milestones in the Greek shift here was with Socrates and the Greek scientific revolution. So in some ways he has like traditional Greek society, like Homer, Sophocles. There we see these elements of individuality, subjective freedom haven't developed yet. But then a change starts to take place with the Greek philosophy and the first inklings of this criticism of traditional culture come with Socrates. Right? Why is Socrates so important? We're all philosophers, we know, right? The unexamined life is not worth living. Remember this from the Apology, right? What's he saying there? The unexamined life is not worth living, right? It's a nice slogan, but what does he really mean by that, right? What it means is, well, in Greek life, right, in Athens, right, we are all following custom and tradition. There are basic things that we're all supposed to do, right? We're all following in those customs and traditions and not thinking about it. Socrates comes along, well, why not? Well, we should think about this. Are our customs and traditions really true? Do they really stand up? Well, let's have a hard look at this, right? And so what does he do? He goes around Athens and asks people, okay, you say you're the expert for this. Is this really true? Tell us about it. And embroils people in contradictions, right? Really irritating, right? You have this guy chasing you after you the whole time, asking you questions, humiliating you publicly, right? You thought you knew, right? I know what life is all about here in Athens. I've lived here all my life. I know which customs, we should just follow these customs and traditions. Here's this guy coming and telling me they're contradictory. They don't make any sense. I don't know what I'm talking about. That's maddening, right? He irritated the whole town, right? So what happens? They bring him up on these charges. Who are you to call into question our customs and traditions? To put this a different way to encourage our youth, our young people to critically question our traditions. The other thing that really irritated them, one of the charges they brought up was that Socrates was worshiping gods that the state of Athens didn't recognize. And what they refer to is that, of course, Socrates is daimon, which we all know, right, is this voice in Socrates' head, which, according to his account in the Apology, he says, yeah, he's always had it since his childhood, and that whenever he wants to do something that is ill-advised, the daimon speaks to him and says, Socrates, don't do that, bad idea, right? Okay, right? And so it keeps him out of trouble, right? We all wish we had this, right? And so, yeah, what's the idea here? Why is this such a shocking thing for the Greeks, for his fellow Athenians? So you compare this idea to the oracle at Delphi. We have a public temple where the god speaks directly to the people, through the goddess, through the priestess at the temple, right? You go ask the question. The priestess goes into the trance, right? Comes out, and the god Apollo says this. Okay, so this is a public thing, right? Anybody can go there, right? Anybody can ask the god a question, and the god's response is publicly accessible to everybody, right? This is a custom. This is a tradition, right? A highly widespread tradition. Now here comes Socrates. He's saying, right, I have this situation here, a little bit like the Temple of Apollo, but there's one big difference. The God is just talking to me, right? You can't hear it, right? It's only in my head. But yet, this is the God speaking, right? It's a daimon, it is a deity, right? And so I have to respect it. I mean, this is pure sacrilege from the Greek perspective, right? To think that there's a God, a personal God in your own head, right? That none of the rest of us have access to. And this is what really angered people, right? Because suddenly this is exactly the opposite of this principle of Zitnikite, or ethical life, where we're all jointly have certain responsibilities, a certain understanding of the way society works. There's one guy, no, the God says different, sorry. That's maddening, right? And insisting on the authority of the daimon. Right? And so Hegel interprets this as showing that, well, this is the first step towards subjective freedom, right? Because this is the individual standing up to society, to accepted custom, and say, no, I understand this is the way things have been done in the past, but I'm not obliged to go along with this. I can use my own intelligence, my own rationality, and do what I want, right? We can say this today, nobody's going to get upset with us, right? It's going to sentence us to death, right? But in the ancient Greek world, this is unheard of, right? You can't say that, right? You have to accept the customs, the traditions, the gods of the state. You can't claim to have your own God, which is in contradiction to this. And so the way Hegel interprets it, this is also these things don't happen in large leaps, but in small increments. Socrates' daimon, it's somewhere in the middle. It's caught between this ancient conception of the truth being out there in the world and the truth being within oneself, which is our modern conception. Right? So the idea is that Socrates himself, his own personal will, he wants to do something, but the daimon says, don't do it. Right? And so he goes along with what the daimon says. So in a certain sense, it's still external, like the oracle at Delphi, even though it's not public. So it's not identical with his own will. So with that regard, he's still a little bit like the ancient principle. Well, tradition tells me to do this, and so I have to go along with that, even though personally I'm inclined to do something different. Right? But the modern element that he's introducing is that this is still something specific to a particular individual. It's not shared by everybody. And so even though Socrates has to repress his own will, he still wants to make the claim that the God is still telling him something that he is obliged to go along with. And that it's his divine mission to go and ask people questions in Athens, and he's doing everybody a favor by doing so. This is what the Greeks couldn't accept. But Hegel thinks that this is important to understand. This is the big shift that starts to take hold after Socrates, where we start to realize there is some importance and some really absolute value about the individual that we have to accept and we have to make room for in society. And now we get to Christianity here. Why is Christianity so important? Here, the idea of inwardness comes out very clearly in the Gospels, where Jesus is presenting his teachings often in contrast to the older Jewish law. And what does he say, for example, about the prohibition of adultery, right? One of the 10 Commandments, right? Out of the heart come evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, false witness, slander. These are what defile a person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile. So this is what he says in response to when the Pharisees come and they criticize him. They say, some of your disciples, they're eating without washing their hands first. It's written in the law, you have to wash your hands first. What did he say? This is an external thing, you're supposed to wash your hands, but the true locus of your moral being, comes from your heart. It's something inward, right? You can't see that if somebody's washing their hands or not. There's no evil intention there. And so why don't you guys focus on what's really important instead of the external thing? And so Jesus, he in his teaching, he's always making the shift from trying to show people, okay, this is what we're taught, this is what we've learned, but look at it this way, right? There's something more important, and it has to do with inwardness. We have the example of adultery, which is also kind of radical if you think about it, right? You've heard that it was said that you shall not commit adultery, right? One of the 10 Commandments. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman in lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Right, we're all sort of used to this because if we've read the Gospels, this is the kind of thing that you learn in Sunday school. Okay, that sounds fine, but appreciate the radicality of that claim. I mean, that's huge, right? You've already sinned. You haven't done anything, right? You've done absolutely nothing. You have not realized any negative thoughts in the world whatsoever, but just in your thought alone, you've already committed the crime, right? So, I mean, think of the way modern jurisprudence deals with these kind of situations, right? There's people who commit crimes, there's people who plan crimes, right? But there's some our intuitions are different about these things a little bit, right? And here Jesus is saying, right, that it's that inward sphere which is the key one. And you've already done it if you've even thought about doing it, right? That's just as bad. And so again, the focus on the inward side. The same thing with practicing one's religion in the open. He's critical of people who are praying very ostentatiously on the street corners, saying this is completely superfluous because God sees everything. He can see into your own heart. So that is just for the external sphere, but what's important is your inward disposition. So that should be the key thing that you're focused on when you're praying. And so, don't pray in order to be seen by other people. What else does he say, right? Not store up for yourselves treasure on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. So there's a rejection of the idea that something external here in the world is of any value at all, right? These are things which are passing, right? That they're going to come, they're going to go. This is not valuable, but there's something else, or he calls it treasures in heaven. And what does he mean by that? I'm not certain, but the idea is that my interpretation, that this is something inward in each of us, right? This is something about our inward moral disposition, which we can keep, and that will be unchanging. They can take away my house or my money or something, but they can't take away my good heart, right? This is something that nobody can steal from me. Along the same lines, don't fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, right? So he's been speaking this in a time of terrible oppression, the Roman occupation of Judea, right? Don't worry about it. Your body is just a part of the external sphere. Your soul is the inward side. Kind of a radical claim. Okay, I don't want to commit myself to overlooking the important fifth question of who cares. And so I'm going to skip a couple of slides and get to this. Why is this relevant for us today? And we could also discuss this a little bit, this idea of Hegel not necessarily being a straightforward, despite his ethnocentrism and racism at points, he's not necessarily a proponent of a narrow-minded pro-Western ideology in any case. These are, as we discussed, things which are still ongoing. I think most important for us are these questions. Okay, do we believe his story or not? Is this true? That we as individuals have developed these faculties of inwardness which we come to recognize. Is this really a genuine historical process which he has traced? And we end up with these values of subjectivity and inwardness that we have today. Okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that that's correct. Now, is this really all a good thing, right? So in a certain sense, the way the story is told, right, this is a great triumphant thing. This is the liberation of the individual, right? I'm happy I didn't live in those terrible repressive societies where people told me what to do my whole life, right? But now I can make my own decisions. I live in the modern world. I am the master of my own agency, right? We still struggle with this in some smaller or lesser things with regard to our parents or some other obligations we have in larger groups. But by and large, this is something that I think clearly has won out in the modern world, right? We all generally regard ourselves as individuals and value our individuality. But is this a one-sidedly positive thing? Not really. In the modern world, the downside of this, the problem with this is we suffer from isolation, alienation, and anomie, right? What the ancients had was a sense of a common culture that everybody could identify with and participate in. This bound people together in many different ways. When we lose that and we say, well, that's a repressive thing, what I am primarily is not in my relationship to those larger things, the community, my family, my tribe, but rather I am an individual, all that stuff drops away. Now here I stand alone. That looks a lot different, right? And suddenly, when I look out at the world, I don't see things that I necessarily identify with, but rather things that I feel alienated from. Right? I mean, when we say certain, I don't know, laws or certain things from administration or whatever, you see this all the time. You watch the news, and you watch the news like I do, you get frustrated sometimes, right? Why on earth? How could they go along with this? It seems so absurd, right? What's happening there? My alienation with modern politics. In other words, it's something that's happening out there in the world that I don't really identify with, my own individuality disapproves of. I'm following the Socratic approach of trying to critically analyze the world around me, and I'm not happy with what I find. I am alienated from it. This is in contrast to this ancient conception where, of course, one is immediately at home with the world around them. This is the world you know, right? You're not supposed to criticize it or think about it as an individual. But now we're all set apart from this as the point of departure as individuals that we're supposed to call this into question. And then this leaves us in an alienated situation where we're constantly sort of bumping up against things like, I don't know, the government, the financial sector, corrupt police department, whatever. Things in the external world which seem to be in defiance of what I would understand as rational institutions in society. This leaves me with a sense of isolation, with alienation, with anomie. I don't have the same connection with other people. And it's difficult for me then to try to construct my own self-image. I guess this is the next in the struggle to establish our own self-identity. In the past, this is very easy, right? In the ancient Greek world, who are you? Well, I'm so-and-so, I belong to this demos, right? Or I belong to this family or something like that. Your identity is very straightforward. In the modern world, who are you? That's a much more difficult question, right? And of course we can say I'm from this country or I'm born in this place or maybe I'm from a certain religion, but who are you really, right? You have to do a lot more work to establish your personal self-identity vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And Yeah, think of this, I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Think of modern social media here, right? Facebook, what's going on there? Right? Why is it such a huge global phenomenon? How do you explain the success of this? It's not just about connecting people. I mean, it goes far beyond just that. Right? It's just about connecting people, like they say, where you don't need to tell those people your personal, intimate details of your daily life, right? It's something much different, I submit. It's about establishing your self-identity. This is who I am. Let me tell the world who I am. Let me define myself by means of this medium. And so this is, as we know, and discussions led to all sorts of critical discussions about what this struggle means, right? It can lead to, for example, narcissism. People become completely fixated on this, right? They're constantly, updating their Facebook page or selfies of themselves. Their whole world revolves around the creation of a certain self-image which they want to portray to the world. Right? Go back to the time of Hegel. Go back to the time of Socrates. They would look at this. What on earth happened, right? Did the world just become stupid all of a sudden? What happened? This is the apex of self-indulgent absurdity, mindlessness, right, from their perspective, right? This is what happens when people completely lose all anchorage in the social sphere, and that they're left just on their own to make a song and dance about who am I as an individual. This is the modern cry of despair. Who am I as an individual? I don't know, but I'll make an argument. Let me show you, right? And I think, again, just my own intuition here, but test your own intuitions about this, right? Your own interaction with people you know. Is there something to this, right? We want this one value of subjectivity and individuality, but there's a price for it. This is the price, right? We lose the other thing, right? We lose community, civic virtue, solidarity, right? We're standing completely alone. And so, the thought, skip a few more of these, is that what I wanted to leave us with is that the goal should be to maintain a balance, right, between these kind of virtues. So we want to take the positive thing that the ancient world had, the kind of solidarity, community, identification that brought people together and made societies strong. But yet, on the other hand, we also want that part of the modern world that we value so greatly, right? That there is something about me as an individual that needs a little space to unfold itself, right? It needs a little bit of freedom and autonomy. It has to be respected, right? That is the modern challenge, to bring those two things together in a meaningful way. And I think, that is an ongoing struggle that we have that, I think Hegel has something to teach us about, and it's good sometimes to test our own intuitions by stepping back and looking at a broader picture historically, and stepping out of our own daily routines and intuitions and asking ourselves, okay, how do I experience the world? Why might this be different than it was in the past? So I think I will stop there, and I thank you for all your infinite patience here.